Nathaniel Cole was 36 and ran a horse ranch alone on the dry edge of Bitterroot Valley, Montana. 40 acres his grandfather had carved out of nothing. No postcard charm to it. A leaning barn, a stubborn well pump, 6 horses, a truck that coughed black smoke every winter, and a farmhouse with one chair pulled out at the table because nobody else ever sat there. He woke before dawn, fed the horses, mended fences, hauled hay, and went to bed early because solitude, after enough years, becomes its own exhaustion. 8 years earlier, he had loved a woman named Rachel Sinclair, a photographer from Seattle who came through the valley one summer and stayed long enough to make him believe in things he had no business believing in. She wanted him to sell the ranch and follow her west. He couldn't let go of the only thing his grandfather had left that still smelled like the man. The last time he saw her, she stood by her car in the gravel lot outside the diner, rain soaking through her jacket. "You're choosing the dirt over me," she said. He had no answer that wasn't a lie, so he said nothing and she drove away. He told himself he'd call. He never did. Her messages thinned, then stopped, and he let the gap close on its own. He thought that chapter was finished until a Tuesday morning 8 years later, when his phone rang while he was untangling a fence wire. A lawyer named Diane Pierce, calling from Seattle, told him in a careful voice that Rachel Sinclair had died 11 days earlier from complications after a routine surgery. Nathaniel stood in the middle of his own pasture, while a gelding grazed nearby, unbothered, and felt the ground tilt. Before she died, Diane said, Rachel left a sworn statement naming him father of her daughter, a 7-year-old girl named Sage. The girl was with an emergency foster placement since Rachel had no family fit to take her, and the court would decide guardianship within 48 hours. As biological father, Nathaniel had the right to petition for custody. But the judge would want proof of a stable home, a steady income, and ideally, a functioning family structure, not a single man living alone in a bunkhouse with horses for company. If he couldn't prove that by the emergency hearing the next morning, Sage would go into long-term foster care while the case crawled through the courts for months, maybe years. That night, he read the letter Rachel had left him. She wrote that Sage loved horses she'd never even ridden, hated loud arguments, and had recently started asking what her father was like. The last line broke something loose in his chest. If any part of the man I loved is still in you, don't let her think she's been left behind twice. He didn't sleep. He cleared out the small room at the end of the hall, dusted the old bed frame, found clean sheets, set a desk by the window. But by morning it was obvious a clean room wasn't a family, and a family was exactly what the court wanted to see. There was only one person in town he could think to ask. Audrey Lane, 31, ran the secondhand bookshop and coffee counter near the feed store, lived in the loft above it, and used to teach middle school until something happened 5 years back that nobody in town said out loud. She kept people at arm's length, but Nathaniel had watched her slip a coat to a shivering kid outside the shop, watched her talk a screaming toddler down to giggles with nothing but a low, steady voice. She wasn't soft, she was solid, and he was out of options. He walked into her shop, set both hands on the counter in front of 3 customers who stopped pretending not to listen, and said, I need a wife by tomorrow morning. The shop went silent. Audrey set down the stack of books she was shelving and said, very evenly, say that again. He told her everything. Rachel, the years of silence, the call from Diane, the desperate math of it. Audrey pulled him into the back room that smelled like old paper and burnt coffee and closed the door. Where's the child now? She asked. With strangers in Seattle, he said, if I prove I'm stable, they bring her here after the hearing. Does she know about you? Her mother told her before she died. Audrey studied him a long moment. You understand what you're asking, she said. You want a stranger to marry you in less than a day, become stepmother to a grieving child, and lie to a judge about what we are. I understand, he said. No, she said, sharper now. I don't think you do. That little girl isn't a form you fill out. She's going to be furious. She might hate both of us. If I do this, I'm not performing for one morning in a courtroom. I'm stepping into her life. He laid an envelope on the table, $12,000, half the ranch's savings, and offered to sign over partial ownership of the house, too, so she'd never be dependent on him. This isn't a real marriage, he said. 1 year, maybe less. You help me show the court Sage has a stable home, and if you want out after, you keep everything. Audrey didn't touch the envelope. You think I'd do this for money? She said. I think you wouldn't do it without protecting yourself, he answered. That seemed to land. And the girl. Audrey asked quietly. If she gets attached to me in a year, do I just become a clause that expired? He hadn't thought that far. Children know when they're being managed, Audrey said. They might not understand the paperwork, but they feel the difference. She told him then about Marisol, a girl in her 7th grade class who came in some mornings with bruises she blamed on falling. Audrey suspected worse and hesitated to report it without proof, afraid of making things worse if she was wrong. One January night, Marisol ran from home toward the school looking for her, and the doors were locked. They found her on the steps the next morning, frozen overnight. Audrey quit teaching within the month and never let herself get close enough to fail anyone again. If I agree to this, she said, it isn't for you, and it isn't really for the money. It's because I'm done standing still while a child needs somebody to move. Then she laid out her terms. Sage came first, always. He would never force the girl to love him or call him anything. They would tell Sage the truth in pieces she could carry, not a fairy tale. And if Audrey ever believed Sage was unsafe with him, she would report it without hesitation, marriage license or not. He agreed to every line. They married the next morning in a courthouse with a clerk named Ruth, who clearly thought she'd seen everything until that day. The vows sounded more like a contract than a love story, and neither pretended otherwise. The custody hearing ran 2 hours. When the judge asked Audrey why she'd married so fast, she said plainly that a child who just lost her mother shouldn't be shuffled through strangers if her father could give her a real home, and that she believed he could learn to be one. Do you love him? The judge asked. Not the way people usually mean it, Audrey said, but I trust his reasons, and right now, stability matters more than romance. At least you're not lying to me, the judge said, and granted temporary guardianship pending review. That afternoon, they drove to meet Sage. She was smaller than he'd pictured, serious eyes uncannily like his own, clutching a backpack like armor. You're the one who left my mom, she said the moment she saw him. He knelt to her height. Yes, he said. I left, and I was wrong. Mom said you used to be good, Sage said. Your mom was better than I ever was, he answered. Audrey introduced herself without softening anything. I don't know yet if I love him, but I won't lie to you to make this easier. Sage studied her, then asked if she could bring the box of her mother's things. You can bring everything, Nathaniel said. No one is taking it from you. Audrey promised her a chest with a lock so the things would always be hers alone, and Sage's guarded face cracked just slightly, and she nodded. Just for now. The first weeks on the ranch were hard in a quiet, grinding way. Sage barely spoke, ate little, kept her door shut, never called him anything but a flat nothing. Audrey moved into the downstairs room. He stayed at the far end of the upstairs hall, Sage's door directly across from his. Every morning Audrey made breakfast and asked only for 3 bites, no arguments, and Sage always gave her exactly 3. One afternoon, Sage admitted she liked drawing horses, and Audrey said her mother had been right to notice it, which earned a long stare and, that evening, a pencil sketch left on the kitchen table. Nathaniel spent that night carving a small wooden horse to match it, leaving it on her desk before sunrise. She only said the ears were a little off, then hugged it to her chest like she hadn't meant anyone to see. Small things accumulated, feeding chickens, learning which plants were weeds, a stubborn rooster that hated her on principle, a laugh she didn't seem to notice she'd let out. Then, in the workshop one evening, Sage rushed a cut with a carving knife and sliced her palm. Fear made his voice come out as anger, and she ran from him crying. Audrey bandaged the cut while he sat outside, hating himself. When Sage came out afterward, he apologized for letting fear sound like fury, and she said quietly that her mother used to get scared too, but never yelled. Can you teach me again tomorrow? Slower, she asked, and something in his chest came loose for the better. A bad fever hit her that winter, fast and frightening. Through the worst of the delirious night she called for her mother and clung to the blanket like it might vanish. Audrey sat with her, calm and certain, telling her over and over that neither of them was leaving. Nathaniel hovered uselessly until Audrey told him sharply to be useful instead of guilty. Get water, call the doctor, check the road. By dawn, the fever broke, and Sage, half asleep, finally said, I was scared you'd leave, using a word for him she'd never used before. He promised, carefully, not forever, just that he wasn't going anywhere tonight, and she placed her small hand over his and said, Today it's okay. From there, the house began to breathe differently. The social worker's follow-up found a child fed, schooled, grieving honestly, and choosing on her own to stay. Months passed. The court granted permanent guardianship. One evening on the porch, with 4 months left until their year was up, Nathaniel told Audrey he'd sign whatever she needed if she wanted out. "Do you want me to go?" she asked. "No," he said. "Then stop holding the door open for me," she answered, and told him she didn't want a divorce. That somewhere between teaching a furious child to trust again and watching him learn to be a father, the ranch had stopped being his alone and started being theirs. He kissed her then, not out of any contract, and from the kitchen doorway Sage's voice announced, perfectly unbothered, that she'd known for a month already. They held a small second ceremony in the orchard that spring, not to make the marriage legal again, but to mean it on purpose. Sage stood between them, holding wildflowers she'd picked herself. "The first time I married you," Nathaniel said, "it was because I was afraid of losing my daughter. Today I'm here because I don't want a life that doesn't have you in it." Audrey told him the truth back, that a house built for one desperate request had somehow become the only home she wanted, and because somebody needs to remind Pa not to overwater the garden, Sage added, deadly serious, and everyone laughed. That night the three of them sat on the porch watching fireflies drift over the pasture, and Sage asked if her mother would be happy. For the first time, thinking of Rachel brought gratitude instead of only guilt. She'd be happy you're loved, he told her, and meant it completely. He had once needed a wife only to keep his daughter. What he got, in the end, was a daughter, a wife, a family he hadn't known how to want, and a second chance he still wasn't sure he deserved, but intended to spend the rest of his life earning anyway.